Hey, what's guys? Planar Damage is a brand new mechanic in Don't Starve Together added in the From Beyond update series, and oh my god, this feature is confusing. Well, I mean, it won't be in a minute, but normal damage calculations in this game are generally very easy. You just take damage and subtract a percentage of it if something is armored, but with Planar Damage, antics aside, this mechanic really isn't that bad to grasp, and the practical implications from a gameplay and game design perspective make sense for where DST is headed. However, it certainly isn't intuitive without looking into it beforehand. But of course, that's why you're here. To get the basics down, let's start by looking at damage as executed by the player. As stated, all damage calculations prior to this update were fairly straightforward. A dark sword deals 68 damage, so when I hit this target dummy, it receives 68 damage. If the target dummy is wearing a football helmet, which reduces incoming damage by 80%, the dummy instead receives 13.6 damage, being 20% of 68. Now, the new Bright Shade sword also outputs 68 damage, however, when attacking this armored dummy, we can see it receives 37 damage, so what's the difference? Well, as I'm sure you can guess, the answer is planar damage. Specifically, with each strike, the Bright Shade sword actually outputs two damage types, 38 physical or standard and 30 planar. What's happening here is that armor protection only considers standard damage, so the armor is reducing the 38 standard damage down to 7.6 by absorbing 80%. However, the remaining 30 planar damage doesn't interact with the armor at all, passing clear through and dealing the full additional 30 damage, adding up to 37. So in this way, yes, planar damage essentially acts as true damage, ignoring armor and operating entirely outside of pre-existing systems. Even the 100% armor protection granted by the Thulsite Crown's force field ability does not stop any planar damage. In fact, the only armor mechanic prior to this update that has any interaction with the planar system is the full damage negation ability granted by the bone armor, as internally, the ability doesn't actually provide an armor value. The only way to reduce incoming planar damage is with armor that grants planar defense, which right now is limited to the Dreadstone armor, the Bright Shade armor, and the Void armor sets. Let's keep with the Bright Shade for now. The Bright Shade chest piece provides 80% standard damage resistance, while also providing 10 flat planar defense. Striking this dummy equipped with the armor shows us that it receives 27 damage, the physical damage again reduced to 7.6, and the planar damage reduced to 20 via the flat planar defense buff. Simple enough, two systems acting simultaneously separate from one another. Another example, moving on to defending against enemies that actually deal planar damage, Rasp, one of the 3 Ink Blights, deals 40 total damage with each strike, 20 standard and 20 planar. The 20 standard damage is reduced to 4 by the armor protection, and the planar damage is brought down to 10 via the flat planar defense, giving us the resulting 14 damage. To complicate things a bit, let's take a look at Deadly Bright Shade. The Deadly Bright Shade's retaliation attack deals 100 physical damage and 30 planar damage. Furthermore, the Bright Shade armor possesses a perk granting it additional defense against lunar-aligned foes, specifically an additional 10% damage reduction applied after the initial 80%, as well as a 10% planar damage reduction applied prior to the flat planar defense. So when we are struck, the 100 standard damage is reduced to 20 and then reduced to 18, and the planar damage is first reduced to 27 and then to 17. Together, we get 35. To wrap up our discussion about planar defense, it's worth mentioning that unlike with standard armor defense, planar defense does stack with each armor piece. That is to say, if you wear both the Bright Shade armor, which provides 10 planar defense, and the Bright Shade helm, which also provides 10 planar defense, you will in fact have 20 planar defense. Initially, I thought this was a set bonus, as the full Bright Shade armor set does provide additional set bonuses that will factor into our calculations in a moment. However, in testing, mixing and matching different armor pieces that provide planar defense combined the values regardless of whether they belong to the same set. Okay, so wearing the full Bright Shade set provides us with 80% standard protection, an additional 25% standard damage reduction after the initial calculation, 25% planar protection, and 20 flat planar defense. Running the numbers, I won't bore you with reading it out this time, we see that we receive 17 damage, a seriously substantive decrease. Previously, armor stacking only served as a way to conserve armor durability, but now, between planar defense stacking and set bonuses, armor stacking is proving to be much more viable for combat encounters, nearly halving the damage we were taking beforehand. Yet another interesting gameplay alteration introduced by this system. Now, moving on to our final topic for today, we have Planar Entity Protection. Planar Entity Protection is a unique trait that has been applied to the lunar and shadow-aligned creatures added in From Beyond. Planar Entity Protection acts as a sort of invisible natural armor, reducing incoming physical damage in accordance with this equation. This is the Bright Boxer, a lunar-aligned punching bag, so it possesses Planar Entity Protection. When I strike with the Dark Sword, we can calculate our damage output by multiplying 68 by 4, adding 64, taking the square root of this value, subtracting 8, and multiplying by 4, giving us 41. Good luck doing that one on the fly. Very important to note though is that although being called planar entity protection, this equation only influences standard damage. Planar damage still pierces, remaining unaffected. So when I strike with a bright shade sword, we take our standard damage output of 38, multiply by 4, add 64, square root, subtract, multiply, and then add our planar damage unaffected to get our resulting 56 damage. Additionally, what's interesting about this equation is that its parameters dictate that the stronger the incoming attack is, the more damage will be blocked, taking the old linear system and turning it into a system of diminishing returns. Sticking to forms of standard damage, for clarity, the Dark Sword normally deals 68 damage, however it was reduced to 41, a 39.7% decrease. A Blow Dart normally deals 100 damage, but only deals 54 to planar protected entities, a 46.8% decrease. A full stack of 40 gunpowder normally deals 8,000 damage, but in this case it only deals 684, a 91.5% decrease, which is insane. So yeah, you get the gist. With the given relationships, something that can easily fell all seasonal bosses is rendered comparatively useless against these new creatures. Very neat, kind of scary, overall intriguing implications for future encounters. And with that, we've covered all the mechanics introduced with the new planar damage system. This video is predominantly informed by the lovely people helping to run the DST wiki alongside my own personal testing. It's worth noting that the system is still not fully understood with complete certainty, however the information I presented today consists of everything I was able to figure out. If you have any additional questions, wanted clarifications, or calls for additional testing, feel free to reach out via the comments. I always read those. If you enjoyed this video, I'm glad you did. Thank you for watching.